Hi everyone. Today we're going to be talking about the good neighbor policy. So in our previous discussions, we were talking about how the United States was using the big stick policy to interfere in the affairs of Central American countries. So before we get into the good neighbor policy, it is worth noting that between the late 1900s and the early 1800s and the early 1900s, the United States was trying to assert itself in the region. So the United States was becoming an industrialist capital, and because they were becoming industrialists, they were going into different areas of the world, asserting their power against European interference, and also asserting their hegemony over the other Latin American countries and Caribbean, Asian and Latin American countries as well. So throughout the early 1900s, the United States created a series of policies that allowed them to intervene in the affairs of different countries. You have the Manifest Destiny as an idea, the Monroe Doctrine, the Big Stick Policy, the Gunboat Policy, the Dollar Diplomacy, um, and all of these policies were in a way enabling the United States interference into the affairs of other countries. However, in the 1930s, mind you that the Great Depression occurred in 1929, the United States decided to switch its policy, and it switched towards the good neighbor policy. So today we're going to be talking about it. What is it? Why is it that it occurred? And how is it that it occurred? So today we're going to be looking at three major things. One, we're going to analyze the central reason for the USA's creation of the good neighbor policy. And two, we're going to break down the economic strategy used by the USA to establish a better relation with Central American countries. And three, we're going to be looking at a rationalization, looking at what they used as a justification for them to change their policies towards Central America, the Caribbean, and Latin America, as I had stated. So again, what we're going to be talking about today is basically a drastic shift from an interventionist idea of dealing with Central American countries to now a non-interventionist idea of dealing with Central American countries. That's a very important switch that occurred. So to begin with, as I was stating, in 1929, the Great Depression had occurred and affected mostly industrialized nations. The United States, of course, was involved in it as well. So the United States was now facing a lot of challenges, and what they needed now was particularly to establish trading agreements with Central American nations, Caribbean nations, and other countries around. So one of the major issues that they faced was the fact that the United States was not popular in Central America. After over 50, 60 years of them intervening in the affairs of country after country after country, in fact, they intervened in the affairs of almost every single Central American nation. Central America was the United States was very unpopular in Central America. So now at this point in the 1930s, the United States needed Central American support. And because they needed Central American support and were unpopular, Franklin Delano eventually decided to switch the USA's policies towards the region. And this switch came in the form of the good neighbor policy. And what it stated was basically that the United States would be a good neighbor, meaning that they would respect the authorities of these nations, and that the United States would not intervene in the internal affairs of any of these nations. So what they wanted was basically to say, all right, I'll give you the respect, but I want you to give me the respect as well, and we can establish some sort of trade relation, and we're going to both benefit. At this point, particularly the United States was looking for some sort of raw product that they would take to the USA. So they wanted trade agreements. Eventually, the United States by the 1930s is able to convince most Central American nations of establishing some sort of trading agreement. And what you see occurring at this point is that the United States begins to pull out all of their military support that they were giving in the region. So the protectorate areas, the military agreements were in a way being eased off. But what the United States was doing now is that instead of having their Marines in different areas, the United States opted for training local officers and for giving guns and ammunition to the local governments. So what they were doing is that they were saying, all right, see, we're now not going to intervene in your affairs. We're going to help you out. We're going to enrich your resources, and we're going to step back, and all we want is a trading agreement. So, in addition to that, the Americans provided Central Americans with preferential treatment as it relates to their products. So Central Americans had preferential, um, they could say, charges, or they had preferential prices for them, and they also, Central American countries, lowered the tariffs on any importation that was coming from the USA. So what you see happening here is that the United States is being very strategic in ensuring that raw materials are going towards their nation. And at this point, by the 1940s, they begin to guarantee an importation of coffee into the United States. But by the 1940s, you see that World War II is already beginning. And as a result of that, the United States now needs a lot more support, particularly at home. They need a lot more economic backing. And that is what you see occurring. So again, all of this was a strategy. They were, one, looking at how unpopular they were in the region, two, looking at the economic needs that they had, and three, looking at where they could get the resources to enrich themselves. And it was all of these things combined that geared towards a separate policy by the United States, which was a good neighbor policy. Again, economic interests were very important, but also interest as it relates to what was happening during the course of World War One, or what was gearing up towards the course or the beginning of World War One. So that is the important aspect of the good neighbor policy. So here you have a big switch from intervening in the affairs of other countries to now stating, all right, we won't intervene. We are just going to be helping you out. We are going to provide you US aid. And they also introduced a new system of aiding people. And this system of aiding people, in a way, became a neo-colonial way of controlling these nations, because they are now stating, we're not going to intervene, but through this aid, now you have to fulfill certain characteristics, or you have to do certain things. And that was what was important for the USA at this point. So that is basically what the good neighbor policy is all about. It's a massive switch in policy, but as it relates particularly to economic interests of the USA, as it relates to Central America as well. So again, this is another policy that is very controversial in the USA. Thank you.